Well, the cave's closing in behind me. That dark stained wood's finally closing in. And I bought a bunch of 1x8 hemlock to go down all this whole side of the shop here and around that. It's not a suite in that corner. That was going to be my accommodation. It's going to go, a little 5-foot deck's going to get punched out through the wall and extended out that way. And then holes in the side of the shop for horses to stick their heads in. And all the angling department's going to be all down this side. Get my boat in here and work on shit. And hopefully we'll get some of my very good friends up here to hang out in here with me, come fishing with me, and they could stay in the room once I get it done. I'm getting there. I'll tell you what, the days sure seem to be winging by. I don't know about for all you guys, but they just seem to be going by like greased lightning. It seems like it's bedtime every 10 minutes, for crying out loud. And then you wake up and have coffee, and next thing you know it's bedtime again. Too many things to do. But anyway, that last video I mentioned, I don't know if I said it that smooth or not, but I wanted to throw it out there at everybody listen and see if anybody might have any input on my thoughts of why we feel the absolute terror and dread. And I am thinking of a different angle for the hell of it. Is it possible that for us to see these beings reignites some of our given instincts and abilities that we had previous to them possibly getting rubbed out of us? Is it possible that our sixth sense, a piece of our sixth sense that we haven't used for such a long time, gets triggered directly because of the presence of these beings? Maybe, possibly. Am I making any sense? I dropped that in the last video, and I'll drop it again because I'm really starting to wonder about that. For me to see such a being that outclasses us so easily, so fiercely, so lopsided, why would such a thing need to inflict absolute dread, terror, and danger into us intentionally? They don't need to. You know, your average person that has these encounters and feels those feelings isn't even armed. Lots of people are armed, I know that, but I'm just saying, there's a lot of people who aren't armed. That means they're absolutely helpless against these beings if they felt like violating the shit out of them, right? So, is it a possibility that our dread, our terror to our core, through our soul, is actually a piece of our given original skills being ignited by the presence of one of these damn things? It's a possibility, right? You never know. Now, what do we got? More to share. Recent one, here we go. Sasquatch story, Great Central Lake, Alberni. This way, right behind me. Steve, I'll do my best to reiterate this story. Standing in the arena after a kid's hockey game, a couple of us hunters were talking. I asked off topic if anyone had ever seen anything odd or unexplained in the bush. One guy told me about a time he was hunting as a 17, 18-year-old on an old road near the Alberni Hump, up behind the vet clinic. So that is between Port Alberni and Nanaimo, more on this side of the stretch. It was called at the time the Old Export Road. He said he was up there, and while things were chattering, birds singing and everything else were happening as he moved along, he found himself going between two rock bluffs. He told me he noticed the silence and nothing was making noise. He looked up and thought he saw something standing looking down at him. He took off running, and now in his 50s has never gone back. This guy hunts to this day and makes a yearly trek to Teslin area, so he's not afraid of the woods, just that area. As we were talking, a mother said, I have a story for you guys. She said her dad worked for Pat Carson bulldozing here in Alberni. At the time, they were working at the far end of Great Central Lake. View Lake area, I believe. 0 roads in that area at the time and almost impossible to get in there. She said her father was a night watchman and was down there on the weekends, staying in an old RV. Remember, 0 cellulars, no satellite TV, etc., no Netflix on the iPad. So maybe a few books, whatever. He told him about a quiet night in the trailer, knowing not a human soul was in the region, as he was alone for probably 30 miles or so. At one point in the night, something started screaming at the trailer. It was screaming and started to throw large sticks and rocks at the trailer. They had no idea what was going on or what was going to happen. It continued, but never did it show itself or come closer to the trailer. In the morning, the rocks he saw were tough for him to even pick up. It is what it is. She told us that her father had never lied to her and her siblings, and on his deathbed, she asked if that was a true story. The gentleman said, yes, 100% fact. I know you fished with Jody, and I know you know the Port Alberni area, so I'm also sure you know Great Central Lake and that the area is still very remote. Thinking about what I remember from the 70s and my dad being a logger and a hunter, it was always a tough grind. I totally believe this story and have two more about a fisherman seeing one on the beach near Sarita Bay, and the other occurred north of PG, south of Mackenzie. Those can be for another time, so my fingers are getting sore. Oh well. Take care and thanks again. Enjoying your videos. Off topic. All right, man. Mike, thanks for that email, Mike. And then you know what? If you keep asking around, especially this neighborhood, I don't know what the percentage is going to be, but I'll bet the farm that you're going to come across somebody who either seen one of these things, had an experience, or somebody that knows somebody. Far more often than not, when you get into a crowd or a handful, when you're around people who have been here all their lives. This is just all there is to it. When I first bought this place here, met the neighbors, the very first neighbor I talked to had his own personal experience just over here at Sprout Lake. Him and his family walking up a road, heard some very scary sounds in the forest, turned around and left. And he also had a guy who was his employee who had one come from the high side of the road onto the road, the Banfield Road, right at Internet Hill. You know, that last lookout on the right where you see the canal. And this thing came from the high side of the road, landed right in the middle of the road in front of the truck and bailed over that edge. Just like that, reddish brown hair. 8 or 9, 10 feet tall, whatever, same old description, right? Then Sarita. I've been spending a lot of time around Sarita myself. I spent a lot of time there alone this last winter. Me and Jody actually went and drifted the Sarita, catch a steelhead. Feels pretty calm for me there so far, no pressure at all. And all except for one place. That one place I set up to make a video on an old deactivated log was actually basically about a kilometer up river past the falls, the Sarita Falls. And that was where I couldn't sit there. I had to get the hell out of there. Everything went dead silent, every hair on my body stood on end. I'm like, I'm getting the hell out of here, man. I know what this means. But as you know and everybody else knows, the amount of places I go in the middle of nowhere, how many times have you seen me jump around being all antsy because all the hair on my body's standing on end? None, right? Maybe once or twice, maybe. I've had shit thrown at me on video. Whatever, I just ignore it. But I didn't have the accompanying dread or fear with when things are getting thrown at me. What else have I done? I've videotaped that glowing light way up in the mountains, in the coastal mountains there. Last fall, I believe it was, at 4:35 in the morning. And then all of a sudden there was 2 lights and I got a home video. You remember that one? Okay, but getting back to the original email, original stories around here. There are so many people around here who've had experiences, it's freaking off the chart. Had a couple hunters email me that they had boulders getting thrown at them above Cameron Lake, hunting up top there somewhere. What else? I don't know how many people have seen these things ripping across the road between here and Tofino on the highway. Lots. Kennedy Lake, lots. Nemint, lots. Where else? It's endless. It's endless. But if you could, and all you people around here, Port Alberni area that are watching these videos, do you recall we had somebody a while back emailed in that years ago, there's a big scuffle in town, is one of the crew trucks for a logging outfit pasted one of these things on the road. I believe they killed it. And I believe it was dragged off and buried so not to raise the alarm for the timber cutting problem. If any of you know of that story, or maybe you could ask around Port Alberni to some of the people who've been here for all their life and find out if there's any more details about that. That'd be pretty interesting to find out, and possibly the person that ran the damn thing over, or some of the fellas that were involved in burying it, maybe still alive and maybe willing to give it up, right? But anyway, thanks for that share, man, and whatever you got, just share it. It's never too long, all right? Get it out, share it. Especially it's like these days, reading catching an email on here is almost like a lottery ticket to win, for God's sakes. There's so many of them, right? So the next time you do send something in, send it all in one go. All right, and I will share it, and I'm not gonna bitch about it, okay? But anyway, keep asking around the hood, and you will hear where we are today. You are gonna hear so many encounters, it's going to be ridiculous. Remember my words when I mention that. It's true. What do we got? Steve, follow on to my story below. My hunting buddy checked the photos on his game cam I pulled when taking down his tree stand. He shared these photos with me, saying that big guy was watching. All right. Steve, feel free to use my name. For the past 9 months, my archery elk hunting buddy and I have watched all your videos as we are working to understand the Sabbath. The goal for me is truth. Truth regardless of the consequences that come from searching and sharing what is found. In the search, I've read Scott Carpenter's books and the Book of Enoch by Autumn Williams. All this information goes to build a general understanding of what/who the Sabbath are and their behavior. You know, on that note, I'd like to add in that I think it's possibly right now, it's possibly more worthy to try to figure out who we are to understand all this shit. I'm pretty sure that we have been lied to about who exactly we truly are, where we came from, and what we can do. So I think possibly, in order to crack open these secrets, maybe, possibly, we gotta crack open our own first, right? Possibly. Think about that one, toss it around between the ears a bit. I hate when the phone shuts off like that. Little did I know I would quickly have my own encounter. 3 weeks ago, I headed in early to our elk camp in eastern Oregon between the towns of Ukiah and La Grande on Highway 244. I was the only one in the established state campground. Set up my trailer and camped and settled in for the night. At about 2 a.m., I came awake from an insane stench in my nose. I turned and looked into the kitchen of the trailer, and a shadow moved away from the kitchen window, and the smell quickly faded. I had never smelled anything that pungent and putrid. In my head, I knew what just happened. I would have felt silly speaking out by myself, so in my head I said, I'm only here to hunt and camp. I don't mean you or your family any harm. I figured that since they can mind speak, there's a good chance they're listening to our thoughts anyway. I eventually fell back to sleep and had no other issues that night. The next morning, I finished setting up camp, and prior to driving to my hunting area for the evening, I set up my game camera on a tree adjacent to my camp. Travelers on the highway drive through occasionally, and I wanted to know if anyone messed with my camp. When I returned that night and was making dinner, I remembered the camera and went to check it. It had been shoved to the other side of the tree, 90 degrees away from the camp. A few photos were present, but nobody captured. The camera was well hidden and also strapped down hard. It took an effort to move it on the tree. I went back to making dinner. When I went to throw some trash in the bin I'd set up, it was missing. I turned on my headlamp and saw the trash bag was about 20 feet away and rolled up like a sock. All the trash was still in it. The flexible can was another 20 to 25 feet away in the direct line toward a culvert that went under the highway and over to a small river and wooded hillside. I had no doubt who moved my camera now and why. That night, pine needles were tossed on my trailer windows under the awnings. I covered each one. Again, I repeated my mental statement from the night before. 2 days later, my elk hunting buddy showed up at camp and I filled him in on what was happening. We're in agreement that it was likely there was savvy in the area, and that fueled good discussion during dinner. The next morning, he went hunting out of camp to a stand on a trail near our camp. Around noon, when I was leaving to drive to my hunting area, a large RV was pulling into a camp spot next to the highway. There were 2 men and a large dog. I drove out as they were getting ready to back in. Later that night, my buddy told me that he'd been hiking back to camp at the same time. He could hear them working on backing the RV. He then said that as they were noisily doing that, he could hear the trees being thrashed behind their camp spot about 60 to 80 yards behind them. At first, he thought it must have been a bear and began stalking in. As cars would drive by, or the campers would make more noise, he would stalk in closer. He said it sounded like 2 to 3 inch limbs were being snapped from the trees, and other limbs and debris being broken. Once he got to where he thought he should see what was making the noise, it all went silent. The RV noise continued, but the thrashing stopped. Unsure what to make of it, he backed out and went to camp. 2 hours later, he's made his way back to his stand. 1 hour after climbing into his stand, he was shaken to his core. Across the highway and up on the hillside opposite camp came a roar that he said sounded like King Kong. He could feel it in his chest. He said that it was so loud, he was certain I must have heard it at my hunting location about 4 miles away. He said no animal he knows could have ever made that sound or been that loud. When he was telling me the story at camp that night, I knew that the branch breaking he had heard earlier in the day must have been the big guy, who I thought likely had a hide somewhere near the RV campsite, and along with the presence of the dog was pissed that it was being interrupted. Then my buddy snuck in on him. He headed across the highway and eventually proceeded to let out his frustration in the massive roar. The next morning, my buddy decided to head home, and I asked him to leave his stand, and I'd hunted it for a few days. That afternoon, I was in his stand for about an hour when, what I would estimate must have been a 20 to 30 pound rock, was slammed into other rocks about 80 yards in the trees to my right. I only heard 2 limbs break prior to the impact, so I can't tell if it was thrown from a distance or just lifted and slammed. This time I spoke out loud and repeated my earlier statement with additional that I was hunting to feed my family too. No other sounds or activity happened while I was in the stand that night. I did leave the stand while there was still some light out. I was looking forward to walking out in the dark. That night there was at least 1 clear tree knock that I heard from the direction of the stand while I lay in bed. The throwing of pine needles continued. The next morning I went into the stand at 4 a.m. and 30 minutes after being in the stand, in the dark, it sounded like the same rock was slammed into the other rocks. I again repeated my statement out loud. Around 9 a.m., 4 elk raced around the mountain to the hillside above me. They were in a panic for something around the hill. They were in a panic from something around the hill and above camp. After 20 minutes, they settled down and came down to the spring. I filled my cow tag with the largest of them, and it died less than 20 seconds later, above where the rocks had been slammed in the trees. Uh-oh. I looked around a bit, but didn't see any rocks in the area that could have caused the sounds. I butchered the cow and bagged the meat. I moved the 2 hindquarters in front of my friend's big game camera to hopefully detour the big guy from taking them. I then strapped the rest of the meat to my pack, broke down the stand, and prepared for moving. While hiking the first load of meat out, 5 or 6 stones were tossed toward me, landing in trees 4 or 5 feet in front or behind me, and then chinking down the branches to the ground. I stopped and said, "Listen, I'm leaving. I have 2 more loads to carry out and I'm leaving." I dropped that load of meat at the camp and returned for the next. The rocks were again thrown during the second load of meat, and I repeated that I only had 1 more load and I was leaving. Nothing happened while hauling the stand out. I then packed up my camp, loaded the meat, and left. For the 9 days I was there, I never felt dread or fearful. I attribute that to my efforts to study the information provided in our videos and the books I've read to build a foundation of knowledge concerning their behavior. I also do not think the Sabi were trying to make me fearful. I only think they were curious. I also never had the feeling of being watched. Maybe I don't have that sense, or it's not developed. It's possible the initial statement that I was not there to hurt or harm them or their family, if understood/received, may have put them more at ease with me as I was with them. As it acknowledged them as a people and showed we understood and didn't mean any harm. I believe they were mad at the guys in the RV, but never at me or my buddy. The person wasn't going to be bluff charged out of my hunt, but only because I didn't feel threatened. Had I felt or experienced any direct threats, I would have left immediately. Side note that I only shared with my buddy. On the second day, in the stand between the rock being thrown and the elk being tagged, I was startled by a sound coming from the highway, about 200 yards away. To me, it sounded like a giant bird taking off. Definitely down by the road/river, but so freaking loud that it sounded like it must have had a 20-foot wingspan. The sound lasted for about 10 seconds, but felt like minutes. At first I thought it was maybe a flock of turkeys, since it was so loud, but it was definitely only 1 set of wings and not multiple. I spun on the stand to look and didn't see anything. No other sounds, no wind, no cars, no nothing. My gut feeling is that maybe there is some portal along the river being used by more than just the Sabbath. I've hunted this area since 2003 and have never experienced what we did this year. I've sent you a few other emails regarding how some of these things may be tied to the times we're in. These experiences may fortify that possibility. If I were to pose a question to the round table, it would be this. If you accept the current theory that Sabbath are the biblical hybrid human Nephilim as I do you believe that their offspring, although having the fallen angel DNA, are fallen angels or demons? In other words, can a demon spawn a demon, hybrid or otherwise? People close to me want to lump them all into the demon category due to their DNA origins. I personally haven't come to that conclusion yet. Kind regards to you and yours, Steve. I think very highly of you for who you are, what you stand for, and what you do. God's peace. All of our game camera pictures were normal with elk, bobcat, etc., but one, which I'm including here, Brett Meyer. Okay, Brett. It's tough for me to see. Okay, well, I'm going to share these. I'll definitely share these on the video. Blow them up. Have a look at them once I get on the computer. They're kind of small on my phone, right? So, you know, as well as I do, once you blow up a photograph, especially in the woods and the sticks and the branches and the behind, without being the person, it's just hard for me to see what you're looking at. I can see something might be there for sure, but I don't know what it looks like to me, man. I can't tell. It says, kind of looks like your buddy was watching you take the camera down. Head, eyes, and shoulders, no neck. All right, well, share it online. Let everybody have a look at that. Thanks for sending that in, man. Absolutely appreciate it. Appreciate the way you're carrying yourself when it comes to this topic. Thank God you're thinking rationally, you're trying to figure it out, and you've made peace with the fact that these things are running around where you are. It takes a huge set to still hang in there, right? Especially if you're hunting and you got a kill down, and these things are tormenting the shit out of you. I don't know of too many people that wouldn't have just deserted that carcass and left. Me included, I don't know. No, I probably would have stayed. I probably would have got pissed off. And that would piss me off if somebody was trying to steal my successful harvest. That would make me angry. Yeah, it would. I probably would have stayed too. Because I'm thinking about it. Even the few grizzly bears that have stolen moose and elk off this, I got angry and stole it back. It's like, yeah, you, man. Nope. Anyway, thanks for that share. Keep sharing more, all right? Keep sharing more, no matter what. Whatever you got that can help, share it, all right? Oh, better mark that as red so I don't double down and get absolutely shit on. All right, here we go. Somebody else. Mark this as red. Colorado and Arkansas experience. Hi, Steve. My name's Gary. I've been self-employed for over 30 years, and my business has required me to travel across the Midwest U.S. For about 10 years, I did a lot of work in Colorado. I like to explore the high country as well, do a little hobby prospecting, pan and shovel. When I had to cross the mountains, I would try to leave myself extra time for a little adventure. Now, it was a beautiful late spring day, and I was headed west across Monarch Pass. It was about 10:30 a.m. or so. The forest roads had just been opened up in the high country, so I decided to cut off one on the west side of the pass. I went up into the forest about 4 miles. The road had been recently graded because of a national forest campground a little farther up. There were no tracks but mine in the fresh grade, so I believe I was the only one up there. I came to a tiny valley where the stream snaked its way through. I pulled over, grabbed my pan and shovel, and went over to the stream about 40 yards from my truck. The sun was shining, chipmunks were around doing their chipmunk thing, and the birds could be heard in the forest. All in all, really nice. I was squatting down by the stream and had just finished washing one pan of gravel when the hair stood up on the back of my neck. I stood up and slowly did a 360, checking out the area. All was good. The chipmunks and birds were still there, and the sensation went away. I went back to panning. About 5 minutes later, all the hair on my body went stiff. I let the gravel fall out of my pan, picked up my shovel, and slowly stood up. I did another 360. The chipmunks and birds were gone, and everything was dead quiet. I didn't notice this until I stood up because of the stream noise. Then I got the stink. The best way to describe it is a mixture of skunk and human crap. I started backing up towards the truck, being careful not to trip on something. When up in the mountains by myself like this, I would always carry a .44 snub nose in my back pocket. I reached for it, it wasn't there. One of those, oh shit moments. I know, you can't hit anything with a snub-nosed 44. Well, me and that little rascal had a lot of history, and back then I could hit a 10-inch target at 30 yards with it, but it doesn't really matter when it's not there. I kept backing up. When I got within about 15 yards, I turned and sprinted to the truck. I threw my stuff in, pulled a U-turn, and then stopped. I rolled the window down a little and watched and listened. Still dead quiet, still stinking. I did not see anything. I rolled the window up and got the heck out of there. Bears, moose, elk, mountain lions don't cause the forest to go dead, and they don't stink like that. Even though I did not see anything, I know exactly what it was. You read another encounter where two brothers saw one about 45 miles from this spot as the crow flies. That's the Colorado experience, now for Arkansas. This was a number of years after Colorado. Again, it was a beautiful day, and I had just pulled into a small remote state park campground in central Arkansas. The campground was at the base of a rather tall ridge of forest that ran east and west. It was about 2:30 p.m. when I pulled in. The campground was about a half a mile from the gate office. There were two other campers parked at the front of the campground, and no one was at either of them, no vehicles. I pulled on through and found a spot at the far end of the loop, against the woods in the base of the ridge. I got parked and set up and was standing by the picnic table drinking a beer and enjoying the beautiful day. All of a sudden, something lets out a long howl/yell. It came from near the top of the ridge. I estimated about 350 yards up. It started low and went up in pitch, and then it hung there, and then trailed off into a kind of a low growl. I've heard everything there is to hear in the forest. This wasn't any of them. It was extremely powerful, louder than any human could make, and lasted longer than any human could last. I mean it. No human could have made this sound. When this happened, I actually laughed out loud and said out loud, "Seriously? Are you kidding me?" That's because the night before I'd watched an episode of some Bigfoot show on TV, and they had recordings of some of the howls, and this is very similar. I stood listening for about a minute or so, and then another one let loose about a quarter of a mile down the ridge to the west. This was different. It was higher pitched and ended in kind of a scream. It sounded as if it was every bit as loud, powerful as the first one. Again, I laughed out loud and said, "No way, I don't believe it." But I heard both of them. I'm telling you, Steve, no human could have made either of these sounds. I listened the rest of the afternoon, but that was it. Nothing else happened. The other campers came back later that evening. They had been gone all day. The night was totally uneventful. I slept like a baby. I checked around the camper the next morning, but nothing had been disturbed. When I got back the next afternoon, I checked for signs or tracks again, but nothing. Well, that's it. I don't know if there's anything here that'll help anyone, but you never know. It's not going to keep you from going camping and fishing in the high country each year. Me and some friends from way back go, and we camped about 30 miles west of where those brothers saw one. They saw it just north of Buena Vista. That's also about 40 miles as the crow flies from my Monarch Pass experience. I'll let you know if anything else happens. Stay safe, Steve. When you're out, make sure you got factory loads in your gun, not reloads. That would have been the real oh shit moment. Yeah, no shit. P.S. If you use egg crate foam on the ceiling of the man cave and on the walls behind the camera, it'll help cut out the echo immensely. Gary Parmenter. Gary, thanks for that, man. Appreciate it. And, like you said, you're not sure if this helps anybody or not. Well, it does help, because now we just heard from somebody else who continues to go out into the woods and enjoy their passions after accepting the fact this shit's going on, especially after hearing some of them, right? And that's what we need. We need more good examples of how to react, how to carry yourself, and not to give up. Don't give in to fear, and continue living your life and enjoying your passions, right? That's what makes me mad, is having our lives, our potential taken away from us, whether it be from the lying governments, narrative controllers, or these things, the unknown in the woods and what's going on around us today, right? It really makes me angry. We only get one crack at this lifetime. I hate quitters. I hate people quitting at anything. But I quadruply hate people getting ripped off of quality of life because of some filthy pricks lying and manipulating and controlling the knowledge that we are so-called allowed to have. That's why we're here. We put an end to that bullshit, right? Title, Opening Day Hosed. That would suck. Dear Steve, thank you for what you're doing with the facts. I live in the suburbs, but grew up fishing, hunting, boating, canoeing, and camping in the Manistee National Forest, along and in between Lake Michigan and the Grand Muskegon, White, Pear, Marquette, Manistee, and other creeks, streams, and rivers. I was a Boy Scout. My dad was an avid salmon, trout, and steelhead angler who liked to go to deer camp and maybe harvest a deer. I've seen and heard just about all the local wildlife in my 53 years, and then there's things I'm still trying to figure out years later. In the summer '91, my father separated from my mother, and the way he did it didn't sit well with me. I had firearm deer hunted with my father for the opener and stayed at his deer camp in Walhalla since I was 16 and allowed to go. I was always more of a fisherman than a hunter, but did enjoy the time in the woods and the taste of venison. I also bow hunted at the time and did some small game hunting with friends and their families. When I came home from work one day in September that year, the neighbor and his wife were over at my mom's house. I was 21 at the time, working, going to college, and paying rent to live at home. The neighbors were there to console my mother, but they also had an offer for me. Big Bill leased hunting property near Naughty Pine Grocery in Bitely, and his 3 sons weren't going to be hunting much, if at all, that season. He kept a camper up north near there at a co-worker's cabin. He offered to let me bow hunt and firearm deer hunt on the property and to stay at his camper when hunting and fishing in the area. I accepted the offer. The leased 120 acres was basically a swamp fed by underground springs with one winding two-track snaking through it. There were only a few parking spots and turnarounds for 4-wheel drive with good ground clearance. To get most of the tree stands and blinds, you needed hip boots, which I didn't have. I did not want deer hunting chest waders, but had a pair I could put on if I needed to retrieve a deer. I hunted my buddy's tree stand. It was on a peninsula or island of slightly higher, drier ground and some oaks that you could usually get to wearing only rubber bottom pack boots without getting a soaker. One misstep off the trail and you could be up to your knees in muck or worse. The 2-track ran east and west, where I went into the woods to the north. To the west and north of the stand was heavy, thick poplar. To the east was a swampy, grassy, scrubby field the deer never went in. Bill would drop me off in the 2-track and drive his truck west, farther down to his stand. He'd then pick me up on the way out. The neighbors baited their stands. I had a bait pile of carrots, corn, and sugar beets that I helped maintain by bringing a few pounds for the pile every time I hunted. I saw a couple of small bucks, does, and yearlings bow hunting in October a few times, but no shooters until early November when I decided to take a nice doe off the bait pile just before dark. I put that 2117 game getter with a 3-blade wasp right behind the left shoulder out of my Bear Flare 2. 2117 game getters. Man, I haven't heard that one for a while. Remember that? Remember the XX75s that only the rich guys could afford to buy? I was a game getter guy too. I could hear the arrow banging off branches after it took off west into the poplars. No way was I going to track it along alone in that crowd. I met Bill at the 2-track when he picked me up. He'd shot and dropped a 4-point early and addressed it in the back of the truck. We decided to get my doe in the morning. The next morning we found the doe I'd shot. It was smack dab in the middle of the 2-track where I got dropped off. Its ass and belly had been ripped open and most of its guts were gone. Bill said that the coyotes had got it, and it's no good now. We drug it down the 2-track a bit into the swamp and on the other side of the 2-track from the stand to leave for the coyotes. I didn't bow hunt or even hunt there again until opening day of firearm season on November 15th. I got dropped off in the usual spot in the dark, but this time with my Marlin 30-30. I put some Tinks number 69 doe and heat scent on my boots and made my way carefully to the tree with the stand in it. At the time, you could not legally hunt with a firearm from an elevated platform in Michigan. I cozied up to the base of the tree in my Army surplus BDUs and M65 field jacket. I had a reversible knit orange / camouflage hat on with the orange out to be legal. I'd moved a couple of scrubby branches a month before to the base of the tree to give me some cover for firearm hunting there. I was facing northeast and planned on any shot being to the northwest where I'd seen most of the deer bow hunting. It was calm, cloudy, cold, but not freezing out that morning, and it looked like it could rain any minute. There wasn't much of a breeze coming from the west. An hour or so after daybreak, I noticed movement to my right, close to the trail I walked in on. I slowly rolled onto my right side to orient my rifle that way as I watched this thing move through the tall grass and brush not 100 yards away, moving southwest to northeast. It's not a deer, wrong color and too shaggy. I was thinking of some kind of a big dog with the brown hair I could see. Bill told me to shoot any stray dogs running deer on that property if I ever saw one. I'm glad I never did. I didn't want to shoot a dog. I had my gun up and was scoping this thing out, but I couldn't get a clear view through the tall grass and scrub brush. It moved to this clump of bigger scrub brush with a small tree in it. There it poked its head up, looking to the northeast, and grabbed the small tree with its hand. It's a dude? What the F? Lots of things went racing through my head, like, what the F? Is he a poacher? What kind of hair-like camouflage is that? Did he see me? Does he have a gun? He's trespassing. He's hosing my opening day. Is it Bill's son, Billy, messing with me? Billy's 6'4", and this dude looks to be tall. But I immediately ruled out that Billy would do something so stupid. I kept going to the hair. It was like a multicolored brown that shifted, kind of like a mix fur does, but without the sheen and shaggier. What I did do was quickly switch my orange hat around to camouflage and keep my gun trained on this trespasser in the hairoflage. I was looking to see if he was armed. Then it called out, "Woo-ah, woo-ah, 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 whoop," over and over and loud as F about 4 or 5 times. I was like, what the F? And I was pissed. Some clown-ass trespasser wrecking my opening day, crawling through the swampy bullshit that you don't want to try to even walk through, making these loud slide whistle-like woo-woo noises. What the F? I'm not going to shoot anyone unless I'm in fear for my own life, and I never felt threatened. Then I heard branches breaking to my west. This is coming from the total other direction. First thought is, you dumbass trespasser, you just called in a nice buck and I'm going to drop it right here in front of you and then hold you here until Bill comes and we can get the sheriff. But then the branches breaking in the poplars got louder. It's not a deer, it's another dude walking. And he's a big dude too. What the F? This other dude is flanking me. My attention was divided between the two dudes, but my gun muzzle was still trained. Damn camera shut up on its own again. My attention was divided in between the two dudes, but my gun muzzle was still trained on the first. I slowly started moving the muzzle toward the second dude in case he posed more of a threat when the first dude takes off, crawling to the northeast. I've never seen anything move like that. It was like a fast kung fu master from Crouching Tiger / Hidden Dragon speed crawling across that nasty swampy bullshit, grabbing clumps of grass with its hands and pushing off them with his feet, fluid like a cat. It was gone in seconds. No human can move like that fast. What the F? The second big dude kept stomping away, crashing and crunching branches to the northeast. I never saw him. I just sat there in high alert, contemplating what I'd just seen and heard until it was time for Bill to pick me up. I told my story to Bill and he kind of blew it off, but was concerned there might be trespassers or poachers about. I chose to go fishing for the afternoon, then head home. I had my uncle's Christmas tree farm near his house with my ATV the rest of the season and never went back to that leased property. I didn't believe in Bigfoot at the time for years later until a buddy told me about an experience he had in the UP, Upper Peninsula of Michigan, around the same time. He got spooked bad in the woods. He always has hunted more than I did and was also in the military. I told him my experience and he's convinced that I caught a juvenile Sasquatch that was trying to sneak through off guard and it did a warning call. The bigger one, daddy, mama, brother, distracted me until my gun was pointed away from the kid and then it took off as the big one stomped away. My buddy stopped looking for proof after his night hiking adventure along the upper big Manistee River with a few other squatchers. Ended up having bowling ball sized rocks flung through the trees to splish in the river. Now I am convinced there are or were Kichisabe in the Manistee National Forest and elsewhere. I'm thinking that some of these other partiers at 3 a.m. along the White River back in the late 80s who answered our woo-hoos weren't other late night partiers. I've heard recordings of many vocalizations, but nothing like the warning call I heard. Maybe others out there have heard something similar. I have my own theories on life, the universe, and everything, and one of those that is that most of the time that the savvy are either toying with us for their entertainment or protecting us from the bad ones or other bad things in the woods. But sometimes they get caught off guard and it seems to be near water. It's too bad that we are programmed with us versus them mentality. There needs to be more we. Thanks again for doing what you're doing and for sharing my story if you choose to do so. Sincerely, Matt. Thanks, Matt. Absolutely appreciate that, man. What a thing to experience that. The way it moved, just the way it moved has put the freaking the absolute to the core terror through people just because of the way they described how fast they moved and how they moved. And more than a handful of times, there's been another one there to distract a hunter or people away from what they're looking at, right? All the time that happens. They know you're there, they don't even have to see you. They know to make a distraction to get your eyes off of one of them. I've always got it in my brain that if I'm with somebody hunting and I see one, I'm not going to take my eyes off it or blink, and I'm just going to keep calmly telling my friend what I'm looking at, where I'm looking until they see it. Because for some reason, it's almost like it's a broken rule. It's a rule they can't break. It's almost like we get our eyes on them, they feel it, they know it, and they freeze, and they're not allowed to move until we blink. It's almost like a game, right? It's kind of odd, but it seems to be what the